Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 13th of February of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. These days are very important for Ukraine. These days are big days for Ukraine, and big days means always for Zelensky big money. And according to media, according to information we have, Zelensky received lots of money. I'm talking about Ukraine, of course. During the latest meeting of the contact group on Ukraine's defense, new military aid package worth nearly 3 billion were announced, said Ukrainian Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov. Fedorov noted that the total value of military aid previously provided by member countries currently stands at 35 billion. That's a lot of money. Of course, that's not enough to stabilize the situation along the front line or to break the situation, but this is enough to stabilize and to hold the lines for another month or even two. Funding Ukrainian forces is a priority for the West. NATO intends to continue funding Ukrainian forces even after the conflict in Ukraine, and investing in Ukraine's military needs remains a priority for the West over the country's reconstruction in the long term. And as soon as Zelensky received this money, of course, he changed his rhetoric. If you remember, just 2 days ago, he was talking about presidential elections in May, he was talking about ceasefire in March, he was talking about referendum in May, but today he is saying that I'd rather not make any agreement at all than force my people to accept a bad one. You know that he believes that there is no greater victory for Trump than stopping the war between Russia and Ukraine. That's number one for his legacy. The most advantageous situation for Trump is to do this before the midterm elections. So this is a very important thing, and I would like to remind you that midterm elections will take place in November 2026. Very important elections in the Congress of the United States of America, and according to information we have, and we understand that there are chances, we're not saying that the chances are very high, but there are chances that Democrats can return back to the Congress and they can take the majority of seats and voices, which means that if it happens, of course, Zelensky will receive more money in the late 2026 and during the 2027, which means that the war and the conflict will continue. And this is exactly what the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, understands more than everyone in the world, probably. So that is why he understands that it's time to leave the conflict in Ukraine, because neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are going to settle the conflict peacefully. So he's saying that he will leave the conflict, and most likely he will blame both the Russians and the Ukrainians. Trump currently is focused just on one thing, on these midterm elections, and to win them he needs to bring success, and the only way how to do this is to begin some operation against Iran. And according to information we have, during the previous 48 hours, the United States of America announced that another aircraft carrier group is approaching the Persian Gulf, which means that most likely the strike or another operation against Iran is inevitable. And this will allow most likely the United States of America, the Republican Party, to receive additional points before these upcoming midterms elections. The Republicans are focused just on one thing, to get 51% of seats in the Congress after November of 2026, and they don't care about anything else, and this is a normal political situation. But Zelensky received money. Let's return to Ukraine. He received money, but we understand that there is nothing free in the world, nothing free. Zelensky was forced to pay a very high price for this money and for additional funding. And most likely this is exactly the reason the Ramstein meeting and the Munich, the security conference, the main purpose of the Zaporizhzhia counter-offensive operation was to get as much as possible money during these meetings. And Ukraine and the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Syrsky, were forced to launch this counter-offensive operation with probably the last reserves they have. And during the previous days, according to information we have, the Ukrainians managed to improve their position significantly. But you know that currently nobody can confirm this. The thing is that the Ukrainians are not sharing with information, and the Russians along the line of combat contact, the soldiers on the ground, basically don't have access to to the Starlink system. Maybe this was the only reason why the Russians were cut from the Starlink system, because now there are lots of vehicles, of course, are being destroyed by Russians while Ukrainians counter-attacking, but we have no videos because the Russians don't have Starlink. So if the Russians had Starlink connections, of course, we would see lots of pictures, lots of videos from the line of combat contact, but now we have nothing, just the position of Ukrainian forces. So what is happening right now, according to pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian sources, who probably has some connections on the ground? And first, let's talk about this western Zaporizhzhia direction. If you remember, during the previous days, probably 2 days ago, on the 11th of February of 2026, we adjusted the map in this area and we colored huge territories as a gray zone based on the reports that were published by neutral mappers, by pro-Ukrainian sources. According to these sources, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions significantly as a result of the western Zaporizhzhia counteroffensive operation. But today we received the report published by pro-Russian sources, very reliable pro-Russian sources, that the situation is difficult, but the situation is under control. The Russians haven't lost control over these positions. Probably the Russians were forced to fall back from some directions. Probably the Russians were forced to regroup themselves, but the Russians control the main defense line around the villages of Pavlovka, Novoyakovlivka, Novoboykovska, and Lukyanovska. So despite the fact that pro-Ukrainian sources and neutral mappers adjusted this territory as a territory under complete Ukraine control, pro-Russian sources reject the situation. They deny the situation. They say that there are still Russians and that the clashes continue. Once again, we don't have Starlink from the Russian side, so that is why we don't have even a single video where we might see how the Russians are repelling these Ukrainian counterattacks. And of course, from this perspective, the question is whether this counteroffensive exists or not at all. But you know that when analyze the Ministry of Defense report, they say, according to their numbers, indeed there is a counteroffensive operation from the Ukrainian side. For example, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that during the previous week, the Ukrainians lost 1 tank, 57 armored fighting vehicles, and 90 motor vehicles. So it means that the Ukrainians during the previous 7 days lost 150 vehicles, so which is abnormal losses when you are not counter-attacking and when there is no counter-offensive operation. So which means that these losses are telling us that indeed something is happening in this area. Indeed, the Ukrainians, using hundreds of vehicles, are trying to break through Russian defense. The Russians are attacking the Ukrainians, but once again, no Starlink means no videos. We believe that in a week we will start receiving first videos and first updates. When everything ends, we will restart receiving videos from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, but not now, but only in a week. At the same time, the Russians intensify their activities in the area of the city of Orekhov. Today we received another very important video published by the Russian sources. In this video we can see, and according to the author of this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing the northern part of the city of Orekhov, the territory around the settlement of Preobrazhenka, this territory with heavy flamethrower system, TOS flamethrower system. You know that this is a very important video because the range of regular, or let's say TOS flamethrower system is just up to 6 kilometers. But if we calculate the distance between the settlement of Preobrazhenka, the approximate points of what kind of territories were attacked by Russians, and let's say the territory of the village of Kopony, this is probably the place where the Russians were launching these missiles. They were attacking the territory of the city of Preobrazhenka, and we see that the distance is around 15 kilometers, which means that the Russians couldn't use regular TOS flamethrower systems. But you know that several days ago we received a report that the Russians created or finished production of a new batch of TOS flamethrower systems, version number 3, and the range of these flamethrower systems is more than 15 kilometers. So there are very high chances, I must say, that the Russians probably deployed a batch of these systems to the Zaporizhzhia direction, and if this information is correct, then this is going to be a very huge problem for the armored forces Ukraine, because according to my understanding of the situation, these flamethrower systems are the most powerful weapon along the line of combat contact. We're not talking about Iskander missiles, of course. We're not talking about aviation bombs, but when talking about tanks, vehicles, infantry, this is the most powerful weapon, at least against troops. So, and the Russians most likely began using them in this direction. Furthermore, the Russians are trying to break through defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine in the western direction from the city of Gulay-Polye. The Russians are bombing fields and temporary deployment points and positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area with FAPs, with artillery. So, as you can see, lots of signs of artillery strikes in this video. We can see the Russians are trying to break through Ukraine's defense in the direction of Verkhnya Tersa and in the direction of Gulay-Polska with the purpose to begin the Russian major offensive operation towards the city of Orekhov from behind. So these are the things from the Russian side. As for pro-Ukrainian sources, we have already discussed these updates during the morning update. According to different neutral mappers and pro-Ukrainian sources, the armed forces of Ukraine launched a counter-offensive operation several days ago, and as a result of clashes, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions from the northern direction towards the settlement of Kalinovska. The Ukrainians managed to recapture, or the clashes are taking place for Verbova, Stepova. So very difficult to say right now. We have nothing from this direction, just regular reports from different soldiers, from different forces, mainly from pro-Ukrainian side. We understand that this information could be not 100% truth, and Ukrainians improved their positions along the river of Gaichur between the villages of Priluki and Dobropolye. And according to different sources, the Ukrainians are keeping advancing further. And of course, when talking about these updates, we may say that we have no videos, we have nothing, we can't 100% believe pro-Ukrainian sources. We need to have additional confirmation from the Russian side. Lots of things we might say about the situation. And you know that today, somewhere at noontime, pro-Russian sources partially confirmed this situation. This is the map that was published by pro-Russian sources. So far, only a few Ukrainian armed forces groups have broken through from the north and west. 2 Ukrainian armed forces brigades have been deployed to this sector. They're jumping onto armored fighting vehicles and dispersing into the forested areas. In essence, it's the same old story. Ukraine armed forces attempt to enter Berezova and Rybne have been repelled for now. So several pro-Russian sources confirm that the Ukrainians are counterattacking, and you know that this is a very, very important signal, because for the first time the presence and the existence of the Ukrainian counteroffensive was confirmed not just by pro-Ukrainian sources but also by very reliable pro-Russian sources. And furthermore, according to these changes, the Ukrainians managed to improve their position significantly from the river of Gaichur in the eastern direction. And now we see what exactly the Ukrainians are trying to do. They're trying to encircle the contingent of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, who is currently located in this area, in this pocket. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. Most likely the Ukrainians will continue, despite the fact that the Munich Security Conference will finish very, very soon. They will try to continue this counter-offensive operation. The Russians have problems with the communication. So it's very important to understand how the Russians are planning to stabilize the situation, because this counter-offensive operation can ruin Russia's plans to continue offensive operation during the spring military campaign in the direction of the city of Zaporizhzhia. If the Ukrainians are able to get some success in this area, this can postpone the battle for the city of Zaporizhzhia even for 2027, which is something that the Russians are trying to avoid. They want to finish this battle during this year. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dobropolye direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos of how Russians were bombing and attacking positions to the south of the settlement of Dobropolye. The sources are saying, and the most part of experts are saying, that the situation is stable in this area. The Russians are not moving further. The Russians are trying to stabilize the situation. The Russians are trying to finish the battle and to finish the securing of the city of Pokrovsk. And by By the way, I would like to point your attention that yesterday pro-Ukrainian sources, for the first time since the beginning of the battle for the city of Pokrovsk, colored the city of Pokrovsk for 100% under control of the armed force of the Russian Federation. So we can say that yesterday pro-Ukrainian sources officially ended the battle for the city. There are still gray zones in the area of the city of Mirnograd from the Ukrainian side, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, but most likely the situation will be fixed also in coming days. As for the city of Konstantinovka, the Russians during the previous days improved their positions in the southern direction. As we understand, the Russians are trying to answer the southwestern part of the city. During the previous days, I would like to remind you that the Russians destroyed the last bridges along the river of Bakhmutka in the northern and the central parts, and that was something like a signal. The Russians cut the southern parts of the city from the rest of the city, and then the Russians began offensive. Now the Russians are trying to answer the southwestern part and to dig in deeper and to create a foothold along the city limits of Konstantinovka. They're trying to capture everything along this red line, and then the Russians will continue offensive operation further and deeper. But as of now, we see that the Russians are just at the beginning of the battle for the city of Konstantinovka. Now let's talk about the Slaviansk direction. The Russians began major offensive operation in the direction of the city of Liman. During the previous 24 hours, huge changes were recorded. The Russians are about to finish the battle for the territory between the city of Liman and the territory of the village of Drobushevo. Now the Russians are tasked to establish complete control over everything to the north of this red line. We're talking about this pocket, we're talking about this dense network of the fortifications. The Russians are trying to cut the cities of Liman and Drobushevo between themselves. They're trying to improve their positions and to answer these forts, to cut the main logistic, and then to handle with every single settlement separately. First, the Russians will finish the battle for the village of Drobushevo, and they will continue offensive operation further in the southern direction with the purpose to cut the main logistic lines that go from the cities, villages of Mayaki, Donetsk, and Raigorodok in the direction of the city of Liman. But at the same time, the Russians have certain control over these territories with FPV drones. We have lots of videos of how Russians attacking vehicles and reinforcements of the armed forces of Ukraine that is moving in the direction of Liman. So basically, almost everything is under control, but still the Ukrainians have possibilities to bring additional forces. So it seems that the battle for Liman is entering its final phase. Most likely it will take 1 or 2 months before the Russians finish the battle completely. As for the Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. As for the northern directions, we have very huge activities of FPV drone operators of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. It seems that the Russians are trying to clear the entire northeastern part of Kharkiv region, trying to destroy vehicles, trying to destroy temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine. So the Russians are preparing the northeastern part of Kharkiv region before the beginning of probably a major Kharkiv offensive operation. Most likely this offensive operation is going to start also somewhere at the beginning or in the middle of March of 2026. The Russians will try to cut these pockets in the northeastern part of Kharkiv, and they will try to get the Pechenegi water reservoir. The Russians most likely will try to get the city of Kharkiv as close as possible, and then using FPV drones, the Russians will start attacking industrial zones, facilities, energy facilities through the entire city. So now the Russians, as I understand, they realized that the only way how to stop attacks on the territory of the city of Belgrade, how to force Ukrainians to stop attacking Russia using drones, is to advance in the Kharkiv area and to get as close as possible to the city itself. Then with drones, the Russians will be able to establish complete control over the settlement, and Ukrainians will lose any possibilities to organize counterattacks or even to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. Another important thing that on the 18th of February of 2026, we will see a meeting on the territory of Geneva. This is going to be a trilateral meeting between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States of America. The Russians changed the head of the negotiation delegation. The Russians have the head of intelligence service as the head of the delegation, but the Russians decided to change him, most likely due to assassination attempt on his deputy. I would like to remind you, several days ago, a deputy of main intelligence service of the Russian Federation was attacked, most likely by pro-Ukrainian forces, and so that situation forced the Russians to change the delegation, which means that most likely the upcoming talks in Geneva would bring no results. But at the same time, we have report that during the next day the weather in Ukraine will worsen once again, and most likely during this next worsening of the weather, the Russians will carry out another missile attack and drone attack through the entire territory, and the Russians most likely will attack once again objects of energy infrastructure. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.